Hey, Senda.
Hey, Phil.
Do you want to talk about why PbtA is still relevant?
Yeah, I still like them.
Super hot take edition. Cue music.
Is it super hot?
And welcome to another episode of Panda's Talking Games. I'm your host who rolled a 6-, Phil.
And I am your host who rolled a 10+, Senda. And also, there's some things we should tell you really quickly before we get into the episode tonight. The first one is, I'm not editing this, so I'm sorry. Because the second one is, I'm really hyper.
We're a little extra funny tonight.
We're a little extra tonight. I don't know if funny really fits into that, but hopefully that's how it comes out. I don't know. But the key part of this is I'm not going to edit it. So I apologize. You will find the outtakes embedded within the show itself. Tiny little Easter eggs of joy.
The reason we're not editing this is once again one of our Chit Chat episodes, which are unscripted, unedited chats between you and I, where we talk about whatever's on our minds. In this case tonight, it's going to be a gaming topic. But before, we've done things like gaming things that are giving us life and things that are giving us life in the kitchen, and we'll do more of those as well. But this is kind of part of our way of coping with the ongoing pandemic, which was to be kind to ourselves and take our show down a notch from being tightly scripted and craftily edited to a lot more organic, just us chatting and not really editing anything along the way. So we apologize in advance for any ums and ahs, because there'll be some. We're going to talk over each other a few places, and some giggling and some other stuff. Yeah. All right, cool. So I might have overhyped the opening with the super hot take edition.
That was a super Twitter-like thing of you to say.
It really was, and it only tangentially relates to the show tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about genre emulation, but I wanted to talk about how I kind of came around to suggesting this topic to you, which was that over the last week or two, there's been a whole bunch of chit chat on Twitter about the relevancy of PbtA. Is PbtA still relevant? Is it really that special? Are the mechanics that unique? On and on and on. And so I had my own feelings about this, and I picked up my phone and I was like, I'm gonna go share the world my thoughts on this. And then I was like, at 240 characters at a time, this will be difficult. And we have our own platform by which we can have a much more nuanced discourse about such a thing. So I was like, I am not going to post on anybody's hot take about this.
I am instead not throwing away my tweet.
That's right. I'm not throwing away my tweet. Yep.
Okay.
So I was like, cool, I'll just save it for a topic for the show. And I talked to you about it earlier last week, and you were in agreement. We thought it was a cool idea to do a show. And so what I want to basically say is that I'll say a thing, then you're going to say a thing, and then we'll get into genre emulation, is that I don't think there is an argument for whether PbtA is valid or not. I don't think any one game design ever becomes invalid. There are people who are still playing BX D&D and having a great time, which means that design is still valid. I think that there is probably a different discussion about should designers move on to other things from just making PbtA games, because for certain, over the last 10 years, the indie environment has been making a whole lot of PbtA games.
Yeah.
Which we both have been enjoying and both have been playing.
Yes. And done some designing.
And have designed our own PbtA game, which is also a place where I feel like we speak with a little authority, having not only played many of them, and you've played many of them on SassGeek, you've played many of them in your personal life. I've run I've run a bunch, you've run a bunch, I've played a bunch, and we've designed.
My game group right now, we literally just started a cartel campaign, and I love it. But speaking of Powered by the Apocalypse, right? That's what we're playing right now.
So I don't think you're in disagreement, right?
No, I'm not in disagreement at all. I mean, I think the interesting thing is we spent a lot of time in sort of design space really excited about the idea of Powered by the Apocalypse. And I think that we're kind of past the point where we're using or where we need to keep making games that use those mechanics in a basic way. And we're into the land of using those mechanics in a really cool way, which makes them remain relevant, right? Because I think that we're still seeing evolutions on those mechanics and the ways that people can use them. And sometimes those look really different, like Bluebeard's Bride. And sometimes at first blush, they kind of look the same, like Passion de la Passiones, but like they lean so hard into the stuff that Powered by the Apocalypse specifically does so well that they become brilliant, right? So what is the thing that Powered by the Apocalypse does so well?
Yeah, and I think that brings us back around to our topic for tonight.
Yes.
Which is genre emulation, right? Both of us are in agreement that PbtA games do genre emulation the best, which I think is interesting because the first two most prominent PbtA games, right? Apocalypse World, obviously, and then Dungeon World, which is kind of how many of us got into Powered by the Apocalypse games, are not super strong genres.
Yeah, and that it's super weird, isn't it?
Right. So I think that, and again, I'm going to just say this without any expertise whatsoever. How this starts is that, you know what? I'm going to pause.
Yeah.
I'm going to address that a little bit later.
Yep.
Let's first define some terms because that's what we do best.
What is genre emulation, Phil?
Thanks. So genre emulation is the ability of a game to emulate, that is to play like a certain genre.
Yeah.
So one, that definition means that a game has to have a set genre.
Yes.
The genre could be broad, which I'm not really wanting to use for tonight. So a broad genre could be like, this genre is fantasy.
Yeah,
but
so
that's like
Dungeon World.
Yeah, right. It's fantasy.
It's fantasy.
That's not very specific. Or a genre can be very specific, like this genre is 80s action movies. This genre is Mexican narco fiction. This genre is telenovelas.
Yes. Now you're listing all the ones that I love.
Yeah, exactly. So genre can be both broad and narrow, but for our discussion tonight, what we really want to talk about for genre emulation is the ability to emulate very specific genres, because there are, in my opinion, basically two classifications of PbtA games. There are PbtA games that have a very specific genre. So ones I just named: Cartel, Action Movie World, Passions de Passiones, Masks,
Heroin,
right? Very specific genres. And then there are other ones that are very broad, which Dungeon World falls in, Uncharted Worlds falls in. I'm trying to think of any other ones, but I'll leave it at those. Those are far more broad-reaching genres. Okay, so genre emulation is the ability for a game to emulate the genre of the material it is based on.
Yes.
So a game that has good genre emulation for something like Mexican narco fiction makes you feel like when you're playing it that you are playing in the associated media that goes with it. So you might feel like you're playing in an episode of Narcos.
Yeah.
Or specifically Narcos Mexico.
Well, and the thing that I will say about that is what that means is that both your successes and your failures should drive you into the actions that enforce the genre.
Yes, because as we've talked about before, a genre is a collection of tropes and trappings and things like that.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Good. Okay, so that is genre emulation. Why is genre emulation like that's always the thing, right? So that's always the thing we do on the show, right? Why is that even important?
Why do we care? Tell us.
Yeah, why do we care? So I know I care because one of the things I love out of gaming is to play certain genres. So ever since I was a kid, I can remember that my barometer for whether a particular piece of media is great or meh or worse is whether I want to play it as a game. And that has not gone away, right? Like I just watched a movie over the weekend called on Netflix called The Old Guard. And by the time it was done, I was like, holy shit, I would play this as a game. And that is the highest compliment that I can bestow on a piece of media. As a slight sidebar, I don't like passive entertainment as much as I like active entertainment, meaning that reading a book is nice, watching a show is nice, but I would rather play it as a game. So when a piece of media does something that's so perfectly in tune for its genre that I'm like, damn, I want to play this as a game. That to me is the highest compliment. And when a game can do that for me, when a game can scratch that genre itch, right? That's when I know it's good. Like, for instance, I was sold on Masks, I think in one sentence, which was basically, this game emulates Young Justice. And I was like, bam, take my money. I want to play Young Justice, yes. the role-playing game.
Yeah. So the thing that I was going to say is, for me, what I've learned is being able to hone in on very specific genres does two things, right? It does one thing which is very similar to what you said, which is that I can very clearly anticipate what this game should feel like when I play it. And without even reading the rules or anything, that can tell me a lot about if I'm going to like it, if I'm going to like running it, and once I start running it, if I'm doing it right, or if the mechanics are actually making that genre happen for me, right? Because I understand what the genre is. But the other thing about it is, like, there's that, right? Like, I can look at a game, and once I understand where the drama comes from, I know that I will like it or not, right? Like, and that's like cross-genre. That's why I'm so excited about my cartel game right now, because it's all drama, and it's making me so happy. But the other thing about having really specific genre is that for someone like me, who does not always have time and did not grow up consuming a ton of outside media, having games that mechanically enforce and have a very specific and narrow genre that they can teach you, basically, is fantastic, because I frequently have a passing familiarity or a familiarity with something like similar, but like on the fringes of something. We've talked about this before, actually, how to like bend things that you do know when they are sort of similar, and then use those tropes in something else, right? And that's because I do that all the time. And so when a game has a really strong specific genre, then I understand both what it's trying to do and how the pieces that I do already know fit into it. I have never seen Narcos. I have never like police drama, like narco. This is not media that I have ever consumed in my life, right? I didn't watch, what was the most recent one that everyone was super into? Bald dude, chemistry teacher.
Oh, Breaking Bad.
Right. I didn't watch this show. I haven't seen it. So like a lot of the touch points that I think that other people would have, I don't have. But because the genre is super specific, and because, as we're going to talk about, the genre emulation in the game mechanically is very specifically goes hand in hand with that. I can play that game. I'm not worried about it. I'm not scared about breaking genre. It's super fun, and I'm getting all the goodness that I want out of it.
So I'm going to extend what you said one bit further.
Yeah, do it.
Okay, so everything you said,
yes.
plus the other thing that a game that emulates genre really well does is it actually teaches you the genre.
Oh, yeah. I've learned a ton about Narcos already.
Yeah, and to that point, that like one day, if you ever do watch Narcos, which would probably have involve me in some way or form, you'll watch it and be like, oh, yeah, of course, that character, like, that's El Narco.
Right.
Like
I get
because
this.
you'll know the genre, right? Oh, LaDanya, right? Like there's the wife, and you'll see that play out, and that's the other really cool thing about games that emulate genre well, is that not only do they create the boundary, the space boundary for you to play in, which helps you stay inside the genre.
Yes,
but you actually learn the genre.
Yes,
as a part of it. Like for instance, I had a passing understanding of how telenovelas worked.
Yes.
But having played Passio in past days,
like a way stronger understanding.
way stronger understanding. And not only just understanding and appreciation. And then also, and I forget who was mentioning this to me, but it was one of our friends, because I was talking about this as well. And they said, I think maybe it was Schmitty, that they never understood wrestling.
Oh, yeah, it was Schmitty. It was definitely Schmitty. Yeah.
They didn't understand wrestling until they played Worldwide Wrestling with Nathan Paletta, and then they were like, oh.
I get it.
I get this.
Yes.
Right? Like, I get what's going on here. So that's the other really cool thing. So on one hand, the first point is, right, genre emulation allows you to play in a genre that you will enjoy.
Yep. 2,
it creates a space for you to play inside of that emulates the genre.
Right. Which key thing is there that you don't have to be an expert in that genre to engage in it and do it.
Yep. And then finally, the last part is then, which is like 2A, is that it also then teaches the genre. Now, genre is not unique to PbtA games.
No.
Every game has genres.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes.
And the question is, how well does a game emulate its genre? Because one of the critiques that you will sometimes hear about a game is, yes, this game is a insert genre, right? Yes, this game is a high fantasy game, but it plays like something else. Yes. Or it doesn't, or it has all the trappings of a high fantasy game, but it doesn't feel like, here's that word, right? It doesn't feel like,
with funny ears.
Right. It doesn't feel like a high fantasy game or a low fantasy game, or another one that'd be really important is like, does this game feel like Star Trek?
Yeah, or Star Wars, honestly.
Right?
Like,
talk about a game that's had trouble making that emulation.
Right? Because if you make a Star Wars game and it doesn't feel like Star Wars, and there are some weird specific things in there that make it feel like Star Wars or not, like the fact that you can apparently take down a stormtrooper with some wire and a tree branch, but they're wearing armor. So how good is the armor? Right? Like,
yeah. Well, and so... And so to that point, right, certain games hit their genre better than others. Now, I'm going to do the thing because I'm imagining the imaginary Twitter responses is people will be like, well, if the game doesn't do it, the GM can. Yes, the GM can always game over the game, right? I could make Car Wars feel like, fantasy if I GM'd it hard enough, right? Like,
right,
that's not the point.
As a GM, I don't want to work that hard.
Yeah, the idea is that when a game is, and I don't want to say good, when a game is tuned properly, its genre, its mechanics, and what the GM is doing as well as the players are all in sync.
Yeah.
Right. It's playing the same jazz tune. Right.
And in fact, when it all syncs up. So, for example, the very first Powered by the Apocalypse game that I ever ran was Heroin. And I ran it live on mics. And I had never run a PbtA or played one before, and I didn't quite understand how they worked yet. And it didn't really matter, and it didn't matter because the thing that I did have is that I understand girl coming of age stories really well. So even when I didn't understand the mechanics, I just GM'd my way through that part, but it didn't matter because whenever the mechanics happened, they supported the story that I was making up anyway.
So now let me flip that over.
Yes.
Because I think we're talking about the same game.
Yeah.
Yeah. I played Heroine.
You did. That was amazing.
I don't have a wide breadth of girl coming of age stories because I was a boy in the 80s when there were, boy movies and girl movies.
I like the bunny ears there too.
So there were things I didn't watch because, I was a dude. So I show up to the game with a passing understanding, right? I've got basically in my belt, I've got Labyrinth and I got Wizard of Oz, of which I've seen Wizard of Oz like once or twice. I've seen Labyrinth, I think more than once, but in the 80s, right? So I don't have anything when I'm showing up to this game. But here's the thing. What I do have is I grab the character sheet. I quick check out all the moves. And I check out what's on the character sheet, and I check out what the moves are for the game. And suddenly, I got a pretty good idea of how the genre kind of goes. And by listening to your GMing and kind of picking which move seemed story appropriate, I was able to actually hang in there. And I think I made a pretty okay companion.
That was amazing.
Yes. Which
I loved your companion.
Thank you. Which gets us now to the last part of this discussion, which is why do we think PbtA games are so good at genre emulation? And so I'm going to go back to Apocalypse World for a second and Dungeon World, which are so Apocalypse World has a genre, obviously. It's post-apocalyptic. It's not super specific, but here's the thing. And this is just my personal opinion. Other scholars of RPGs may disagree with me, but it's my feeling that Meg and Vincent, when they set out to make Apocalypse World, had a very specific idea of the kind of game they wanted to make. Even if it wasn't a genre that we all understood, it was a very specific genre to them, a very specific type of post-apocalyptic game. And so the structure of how the framework of how PbtA works, they were able to basically encode that genre into the game, right? Through, and this is what we're going to talk about in a second, through the various parts of the game. And I'm going to save that so that we can talk about it a little bit in a few minutes. Likewise, when Adam and Sage took Dungeon World, they made that game, Dungeon World, is a very specific commentary on fantasy. Based on, again, some of the same design choices they made using that framework. It's the next hop, which I think can be credited to Monster Hearts, where all of a sudden the idea of taking a PbtA framework and making a very specific genre, in this case, teenage high school monsters, right?
Yes.
Brilliant, right?
Yes.
Like, consider the games before it, right? And then consider that, right?
Well, it's like Dread to Starcrossed.
Exactly, right? So just this brilliant hop into Monster Hearts. But then we see it all over the place, right? Where PbtA really starts to shine, in my opinion. All credit due. I think Apocalypse World's fantastic. I think it caters to a certain interest group of players. I think Dungeon World's fantastic. I think it caters to a very large group of players. I being one of them. I played a ton of Dungeon World, right? A ton of Dungeon World. But where I really think this takes off is when we start getting into the PbtA games that really get tight on genre. And it's why I think that The Sprawl by Hamish is one of the best mission-based cyberpunk games, because it does mission-based cyberpunk better than the games that inspired it.
Yes.
And largely because of this framework. And so let's talk about, I want to talk about two sides of this framework, which is the GM side and the player side. And do you have a preference with which one you want to talk about?
No, I think tonight I'm going to say player.
Cool. Okay.
Carry on. Good thing we planned this totally in advance. Not at all.
Not at all. I got to be honest with you. 4 years ago, I don't think I would have left too much of this to chance.
Oh, you don't think when you would write the notes and you would just write stuff and then I would try to figure it out on the fly?
And then we'd like go back and edit and fix, right? But I have to say this, now I have zero, now the need to edit the show is far less because you are a fantastic designer. You are very scholarly about all of this stuff. And I don't feel like we really have to lay down really tight arguments and points because you'll run with this.
Yeah, tell me what you're going to talk about from the GM side so that I understand my counterpoint as the player side.
Sure. The GM side is really easy, right? The GM side in the PbtA framework has agendas, principles, and moves, right? And these are the things that basically inform the game master of how to run the game in the genre that you're conveying through the game. And so some of these, and when I was writing Hydro Hackers, I went through, I think, all of the PbtA games I had on my shelf. So I had 26 different PbtA games. And so there are some of these things, agenda, principles, and moves that are universal. Be a fan of the players. That one's in almost every one of them. And then there are ones that are super genre specific.
Yes.
So, like, for instance, in Hydro Hackers, just because it's the one on the top of my head, there's a principle that says everyone thirsts for something.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a game.
Super genre specific.
Right. It's a game about needs. And it doesn't have to be water. In most cases, it's water. But it could, whatever it is, everybody thirsts for something. And that helps kind of set the tone of the game. Likewise, if you go and look at the agenda, principles, and moves in Masks, Cartel, Passions, any of those, you will find these things that basically guide the GM into how to run this game so that it emulates the genre that you're playing. And the better a designer has done in building those things into the game, the easier it is for the GM to actually emulate the genre, even if they don't understand the genre, because they can understand the agenda, principles, and moves.
Yes. Which is great.
Which is brilliant, and so brilliant that it's technology that has gotten lifted out of PbtA games and placed into other games. So, for instance, Tales from the Loop has a set of principles.
Yeah.
And they work exactly the same way, and they're great. Like, they inform the GM, like, you don't kill the kids.
Yep, straight up. Like, that's not a thing you need to have a conversation about. We're just going to tell you.
Right.
That's not a thing that happens in this game and in this genre.
Right.
Don't
when
do
you
it.
get to its companion game, Things from the Flood.
That's different.
Then people can be killed. Okay. So now, that's the first half of it, right? The first half of it on the GM side is that those three things create the boundary.
Those three things of PbtA.
Now, there are two things on the player side that also create boundaries.
And those are, so the moves that you're actually playing with, which it does, it's the thing that you're consistently interacting with as you go through the game, because they're the things that you're constantly engaging by having the conversation and telling the story together. What was the other thing that you were thinking of?
Playbooks.
Oh, playbooks, of course. I was like, what?
Which also have moves in them. So,
which have the moves in them. That's what I was thinking about the moves. I was like, because there's like character specific moves, and then there's general moves.
Exactly.
You know.
No, you're right there.
Yes. Yeah, so what the playbooks do is they inform what types of people you're going to find in this story, and then they give you the tools to make that type of person. It's still your version of that type of person. They're still customized to be someone that you're interested in playing, but you can't really screw it up, right? Like you're going to create a person that fits into that genre because here are the playbooks that fit into that genre, right?
Yeah, and the moves that go with them are moves that are very specific to that playbook that make it feel.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, I know that none of you will be shocked, but in Cartel, I am playing the wife, and I took the move Drama Queen.
It's a fantastic move.
So good. But I took that for a reason because I also knew what kind of thing I wanted to lean into.
Do you remember what the move does?
Oh my gosh. I don't know if I remember it super clearly, and I don't have the papers right here, but it basically gives me if I make a scene, basically, then it's like I roll a 10 on a push my luck.
Yes. Yeah.
So I basically throw a temper tantrum, get what I want.
Exactly. Yep.
Love it.
and so it's very genre fitting for Ladanya. Now, that's...
No, La Sposa.
Oh, La Sposa. Sorry. La Sposa.
You're thinking of Passiones.
I'm sorry. I was thinking of Passiones. Right.
That's Ladanya.
Yeah. La Sposa. Yes. Now, I've also played Cartel, and I have played the spouse as the husband.
You also played the same
and
playbook,
I took that same move and used it from getting out of being taken out to the desert and shot.
Yes. That's my husband, El Narco. His previous wife is in a barrel in a desert somewhere, dead.
Yes. So the other one is the basic moves, right?
Yes.
Because the basic moves are the roadmap of what you can do in the game.
Right. They're the basic expectations of the game, meaning that like anybody at any time, these are the things that we expect them to engage in. And not just the types of things that you can do, but these are the types of pressure and stakes that are going to come to bear on you if you don't succeed.
Yep.
Right? Which is like a really key thing, because what it informs you is, what does it look like when you don't completely succeed? I mean, it tells you also frequently what does it look like when you do completely succeed, but like, what does it look like when you don't? To me is frequently more important, because success is success, but where we tend to see a lot of tropes is, what does failure look like?
Sure.
Right? Because like, so we talk about D&D for a second, like failure. Okay, you shoot your crossbow and you roll a natural one, and so you accidentally shoot your friend in the face.
Right.
Like, these are tropes about how you play D&D. But if I'm playing Cartel and I shoot a gun and I roll a fail, I accidentally shoot my friend in the face. Ha 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 ha. That's not really necessarily genre enforcing. Like, some weird stuff had to happen, right? It's like way more likely that you fire the gun and you were trying to shoot a warning shot, but you accidentally actually shot someone and now you have to run, right?
Sure.
Like,
So I will say another thing about genre and basic moves. So, for instance, when I was designing and you were helping to develop, when we were working on
Hydra Hacker.
Thank you. I lost my spot. Right.
Your game. Yeah.
No, it's not my game.
The game.
It is our game.
Our game.
Yeah.
The first one.
I designed, you developed. And
yes.
For people who don't know what that means, is I wrote stuff down and then you fixed most of it.
Yes. And then I said, wait.
Yeah.
Did you realize that this playbook uses a thing that you don't use anywhere else?
Yeah. So if you don't know the difference between design and develop, right? Somebody put stuff down and the other person looked at it and was like, I don't know. So when we were working on Hydra Hackers, one of the things in the early version of the game was that only one of the playbooks had the ability to sneak.
Yes.
And as a genre, and not that Hydra Hackers is a genre that everyone knows, but what had emerged from playtesting was that there was a need for stealth for everybody in the game constantly. And so
because you're not supposed to fight.
Correct. So, right. So, okay. So here's the important part, right? You're not supposed to fight.
Yes. Not supposed to fight.
And sneak is important. So what wound up happening in the development of the game is that two things happened. One, the fight move is bad, right?
It's very bad. Yeah.
Even on a 10 plus, it's not good.
It's not good. Yeah.
And
there's no real good outcome for the fight move.
Exactly. And to that point, there is a playbook, the Neighborhood Watch, who has a better fight move because they're the one person in the game who can fight.
Yes.
And then lastly, to tie it together, we moved the stealth move out of the playbook. We put it into the basic moves, which informs people that this is a way you interact with the game. Now,
this is how you problem solve in this world.
Correct.
This is one of the colors of paint that you can use to problem solve.
Now, one of the arguments I saw in one of the Twitter threads was that moves are too limiting. And I will argue that they are limiting, and they are limiting because the moves are part of the genre emulation.
Right. When you have married the PbtA mechanics well with a specific genre, then the limiting factor of having moves and having them be limited is actually something that we like better because it's intentional to limit people into that genre.
Right. And there's one other caveat to this, right? So there are times in PbtA games, because a lot of people will say, like, well, there's a catch-all move like Act Under Fire, Defy Danger, or whatever. And yes, most of them have them. I designed one for as a catch-all for Hydra hackers, so it's there. But there's another piece that's often understated, which is you can just say yes.
Yeah, you don't actually have to make people roll. I mean, this is a wild thing about my particular group. There's, we could have rolled dice at many points during our storytelling, but we looked at our playbooks, we looked at the moves and our goals and like the directions of our characters and kind of where we saw them going through the story. We looked at their relationships to each other. We played for 3 hours and we rolled dice once. And
if that's fitting,
and that's fine.
Right. I think that's perfectly fine. And there's a lot of arguments where D&D will go into that as well. And again,
it's different. We were actually engaging the mechanics of the game, even though we didn't roll the dice. And I will actually make that argument because all of the things that made everything tick for that entire session were mechanics that happened in us sitting down, creating characters, and then engaging the game itself. So even though in D&D, when we're like, oh, we only rolled once, okay, that's cool. You were telling a story together. You didn't actually engage with D&D. I feel like in Cartel, we actually engaged all of the stuff constantly, but we didn't actually roll.
I think that's fair. I think that's a fair assumption. Yeah. I guess my point was to that is that sometimes a player will say that they're going to do something and it doesn't match up with any of the moves.
Right.
And
you can just say, yes, you did.
You can just say, yes. You don't have to funnel it into the catch-all move because the catch-all move is there only if the chance of failure is interesting. Right?
Yes.
So somebody was like, I was just like, I saw so many Twitter threads go by, but somebody was like, well, what about in Masks if somebody wants to do something with their power that they're familiar with, like, why would they have to roll Unleash Your Power? And I'm like, well, you wouldn't.
You wouldn't.
There are times when there are times when I run Masks where the player will be like, I do this thing, and I'll just be like, cool, you do it.
Cool, you do the thing.
Moving on to the next part, because that's not the interesting part of the...
It's not. Well, and so let's say another thing... And this is a thing that leads to the genre enforcement, I think, of Powered by the Apocalypse. And I also think that it's one of the trickiest things to wrap your head around about Powered by the Apocalypse when you first encounter it, is the notion of the game as a conversation, not as basically petitions for action and responses.
Yeah.
right? And because of that, what that means is that at any point in the conversation, you could say, cool, I think it'll be interesting to see how this goes. Let's engage the dice part. But if you're engaging in a conversation and using like the rest of the stuff, your playbook information, blah, 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 your relationships, etc., like, and you're just having a conversation and like it's more interesting to just keep going, like you're still playing the game.
To the point that as long as you don't specifically trigger any of the moves, right? The moves have specific trigger conditions. As long as you've not specifically triggered any of the moves, then you're playing through and you haven't had to actually...
we didn't trigger any moves until the last half hour. That was just how it went.
Well, that's fine.
There was a lot of screaming at each other on the phone.
Yeah. So, and again, I think, so to now start to bring this back, right?
Yes, sorry.
No, it's okay. To start to now bring this back into a final set of arguments, I think that even now, PbtA is still a relevant framework for creating games, but I think that where in the beginning we as design community all wanted to make a PbtA game because it was new and novel. Now I think that it's very much now more of a specific tool that one can use when they want to design a game with a very specific genre, whether that genre is a popular genre or they're making up their own genre, right? I think it's a tool that says, and I've run into this where, for instance, I think we had this discussion early on when we were looking at Ditch Lilies.
Yes. We're like, do we design this in Powered by the Apocalypse?
But what is the genre for Ditch Lilies, right?
Like, what is the Ditch Lilies genre?
Right, so,
I don't know.
Exactly.
Empire Records? Like,
No, Empire,
because it's not.
Empire Records is Damn the Man.
This was the conversation that we had. Like, what is it?
So because of that, we went with a different game engine, because we were like, well, we need a game engine that has partial successes and, player mitigation and all of that stuff that's interesting, but we don't actually need to enforce or teach a genre. So PbtA doesn't really feel like the best fit for this game. Yeah. But conversely, I've contemplated Hydro hackers in several different systems, but ultimately have always settled, like have been the most comfortable having Hydro hackers as a PbtA game, because I had some very specific things I wanted to have happen in the game. Like, I never wanted players to get to a point where they could hold up the water authority with guns to get water.
Right.
So
right. And you can't do, there's no like, I mean, I guess you could. It wouldn't go well.
When it was a Fate game, you totally could have, right?
Yes.
Because Fate is wide open, and if I had just taken weapons as +4 or whatever, and had picked a few aspects about, like, my superior gun skills or whatever, I could hold up the water authority and forcibly steal water. But in PbtA, as a PbtA game with the playbooks, the basic moves, and everything else, you just can't. And so for me, what I really loved about that choice was that Hydro Hackers now plays the way I wanted Hydro Hackers to play.
Yeah.
And it's still, when I think about new game designs, the question I ask myself is, am I trying to emulate a genre? If I am, is there a reason why I would or wouldn't use PbtA? And if I'm not, is there a reason why I feel like I need to, versus why don't I just go look at a whole host of other engines?
Yeah, I mean, for example, PbtA was never something that we had on the table for Turning Point.
Oh, God, no.
Right? Like, it was never even part of the discussion for that game. It was like, that it wouldn't have made any sense from square one. We weren't genre emulating at all.
No,
that's not a genre emulation.
No,
game.
That game solves a different. That game has a different thing it looks at, and a different way it looks at it, and a different premise that it's built around. And you're right. Like, it was never going to be. It would never be a PbtA game.
I mean, it never would be, but like, we didn't even talk about it because it's not a genre emulation game. But we should probably start wrapping this up. It's tricking us because we have two chunks of audio.
No, it's okay. So to put a final cap on this, I guess what we're saying is, one, I think it's great that people are having discussions on Twitter about moving past PbtA because any time that we become beholden to any one framework or engine or whatever, we run into the hammer problem, right? Where if all you have is a hammer, every problem's a nail. Where rather we should look at PbtA as a very specific type of tool, and we should use it when we need to use that tool. And our supposition for this whole episode has been it is a right and fine tool for genre emulation. There.
Yes.
That is, I think, our whole point.
Good. I love it.
Okay.
Well done.
In order for us to move to the next section, we need you to tell us about another show on the Mr. Mark Network.
Sure, on the Gnomecast, you can join Ange and a bunch of other random gnomes, sometimes me and sometimes Phil. You never know who you're going to get, and you never know what we're going to talk about. Usually some kind of article that's been published on the Gnome Stew, because that's where we write the things. And they're pretty good conversations. And sometimes we get tossed in the stew if they're not. So you should probably listen and let us know how we're doing.
Fantastic. Say, Senda. Where can people find us on the internet?
Well, you can find us on Twitter at Pandas Talk Games. You can find us in the forums, which is forums.misdirectedmark.com, or you can drop us an email, panda@misdirectedmark.com. And Phil, once they have that information, what can they do with it?
Please, please, please leave a comment, give us a question, a potential topic, something you might want to hear us talk about. And we'll be happy to do it. Now that our chit chats are kind of branching out beyond just the things that are giving us life and are just becoming random things about gaming that we talk about, we're happy to pull in whatever suggestions you have. The thing that we love to do on the show is to talk about the things that you find interesting. Otherwise, all we do is fill the show with Ditch Lily trivia and Star Trek discussion.
Yes, that is a threat.
So that is a threat. Don't make us do that. Keep feeding us topics. And we'll keep talking about gaming. Now, if you like what we do here or elsewhere on the Mr. Mark Network, you can support our Patreon campaign. Go to patreon.com/MMP. Patrons of the show get access to the Slack Room for Life, which is our collection of just some of the finest Mr. Mark listeners. I say finest. There are other people who are not patroning that are perfectly fine. I know many of them. They're lovely as well. But we have curated a wonderful collection in the Slack Room for Life. You can go chat with them. They're just divine humans. I love all of them to pieces. We have daily discussions. We have, for those of us who are still in lockdown, we have Friday luncheons where we hang out on Zoom during lunch. We have you can partake in many discussions. Come hang out with us and do this Star Trek watch party, which you can do whether you're a patron or not.
Although you don't have to be a patron.
Now you just have to go to the forums
come
for
chill with us.
And other goodies like we occasionally give people stuff. I will say that that's not has been a big of a thing during 2020, but I assure you that as we all go back to whatever normal is going to be someday in the future, that patrons get goodies. They just do. We like to give them goodies. Now, there is another thing that you could do for us that would help us with our If You Listen to Us, You Will Love Us advertising campaign. And it's a thing that you do anywhere where you listen, where you curate your fine podcast collection. But specifically, there's an Apple one, right? What would you do there?
Well, you could leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or the podcatcher of your choice, anywhere that you are aggregating your shows from. Usually you can rate them. And what that does is it lets people know that you like our show, and then it pushes us up so that more people find the show. And then Phil doesn't wander around with headphones and questionable consent issues, sticking headphones on people's heads, making them listen to our show.
That makes sense. We don't do that anymore.
Sorry.
I got a little scared. I was like, wait, what questionable consent thing am I doing? No, okay.
No, actually, Phil is really, really good at consent, so don't make him do it.
I would definitely ask you if you wanted to put on my headphones.
Okay,
it's
that's
weird
fair. You could
because I'm wearing buds,
people.
and that's kind of icky.
Oh, that would be gross.
And now in
COVID
land, I'm definitely
you're
not
gonna get
offering
that close.
buds.
No, and you're probably not going to get that close to anybody.
No.
Really. So maybe from a distance, like yelling, "Hey, do you want to hear a thing?" And then hitting.
I could in 80s style. I could put it on a boombox and stand and hold it out for you.
That's the way.
But I don't want to get in trouble for standing out in front of people's windows with a boombox playing our show. So,
anyway, so the moral of the story is you should probably leave us a rating or review. Thank you so much to everyone who already has. This is why Phil's not in the street with a boombox.
Fantastic. Say, Senda, what's the next PbtA game you want to play?
After Cartel, but I'm so excited about Cartel.
I'm going to tell you that mine brindled.
Show me what you got. Show me what you got. Hey, show me what you got. Show me what you got. Show me what you got. Hey, show me what you got. Show me what you got.
This show is a joint production of She's a Super Geek and Misdirected Mark Productions, the media arm of Encoded Designs.
Show me what you got. Hey, show me what you got. Show me what you got. Hey, show me what you got. Show me what you got. Hey, show me what you got. Show me what you got.
Bloopy.
Clicky. See, that wasn't hard.
2, 1, let's jam.
Did you, Schmitty posted that thing about man listens to 30 minutes of jazz only to realize they just like Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah, that was funny. But remember, we're not doing stuff at the beginning.
That's a little morsel for the beginning of the show.
A morsel. What a good word. Morsel.
Yes.
I usually only hear that in reference to like chocolate chips.
Yeah, it's the amuse-bouche for tonight.
As long as it's not a hamburger, we're in good shape. Because let's just be clear that a hamburger, there is no kind of hamburger that is an amuse-bouche. Just
a McDonald's hamburger is hardly food at all.
I mean,
it is an amuse-bouche.
It's
an amuse-bouche in comparison to what I ate that night. Does that make you feel better?
No.
Am I winning? I feel like I'm winning.
No, but I have to agree that McDonald's hamburgers are hardly food at all. I just don't think that they qualify as an amuse-bouche.
That is also fair. We should now do the show because this is dangerous after show territory showing up at the beginning of the show.
We're going to do a 10 count so that I know where the beginning of the show is, like we did last time. That was very beautiful and made my life very easy. And if only we had done that at the end as well. But we didn't.